Good afternoon. I'm Jill Tiefenthaler, and I have the honor of serving as president of Colorado College. It is my great pleasure today to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us to celebrate a wonderful teacher, scholar, and leader, Professor John Riker. Colorado College is the institution it is today with a mission to provide the finest liberal arts education because of the contributions of our faculty. Faculty leading the college in the early 1970s acted on those visionary foundations to make CC a student-centered institution. Not only did they create the block plan for which CC is so well known, but they designed it in a way that continues to sustain our commitment to innovative teaching. They ensured that faculty creatively refreshed the plan for each generation of students, that faculty engaged students in the field and the classroom, and that nationally known visitors come to campus to enrich our offerings. It's these faculty leaders who have most directly had a hand in delivering on General Palmer's mission and ambitions for Colorado College. John Riker came to CC in 1968. He was one of the faculty members who nurtured that spirit of rigor and excellence and who envisioned the student-centered education empowered by the block plan. He is a gifted teacher and a beloved mentor to generations of CC students. Professor Riker has been an influential leader at CC, chairing the philosophy department for 15 years and earning many awards for his teaching, advising, and service to the college. John is an accomplished scholar with interests in ethics, Greek philosophy, and metaphysics. No celebration of John's impact would be complete without mentioning the contributions that he and his wife, classics professor Marcia Dobson, have made together. They're a wonderful team. John and Marcia share many interests, including ballroom dancing, which they teach to our students, and importantly, psychoanalysis. They have served as joint leaders of CC's minor in psychoanalysis. It's my great pleasure to thank them publicly, not only for their decades of work they've done together for our students and the college, but for their extraordinary generosity. They recently endowed a professorship at Colorado College, the Marcia D.S. Dobson and John H. Riker Professorship of Psychoanalysis, Self, and Creativity. I want to thank John and Marcia for this significant, thoughtful gift and for all that they have done for Colorado College. Please join me. And now for the program, it's my pleasure to introduce Philosophy Professor Jonathan Lee and, of course, Professor John Riker to the stage.
You're so far away. That's better, okay. Much better. Well, John, you and I have taught together now for more than 25 years. It's only a fraction of your career, but it's a long time. And in fact, we've team taught on several occasions, and we're dear friends. We've climbed mountains together. We've traveled, and of course, we've grown kind of shockingly older together. So it's a real joy for me to engage you in a little conversation on this really special afternoon. I know that everyone who's here today is really here to see and to hear from you, and so I'm going to try to say as little as I can. So for starters, I'd just like to know, what's it feel like to have taught for 50 years?
Well, 50 years doesn't seem very long. A half century does. It's strange because the school year is a ritual year. It's the same year every year. begins in the fall and ends in the spring. New students come, old students leave, and they keep coming. And there's something about that feeling of time, that's wonderful school year time, that makes it feel like almost no time at all has passed. It's just, it doesn't feel like I've been here for ages. It just feels like it's a new year. Yay, let's start. So,
And isn't it true that there's something about the academic life where fall is spring?
yes,
At the time when everyone else thinks the world is kind of coming to an end for a while, we think it's beginning, it's flowering.
yes.
Everything has started again.
Oh, it's so wonderful. Yes, to have spring in the fall. But of course, then fall in the spring. You know, but in the end, what it is I spend my life with 18 to 22-year-olds. And by a nice psychological theory, you become like the people or the things you're around, and if they're always young, so am I.
I think I understand that. I'm curious, what was it about Colorado College that made you want to come here in the first place, and that has led you to stay for as long as you could?
That's wonderful. So I didn't come first in 1968. I came first in 1966 to be a summer school student because, and fate's wonderful this way, my German was so bad that I couldn't get through graduate school with the German that I had. And Colorado College had a wonderful summer program in German. And I'm not sure exactly how I found it without the internet, but I did. And came. And when I saw Colorado Springs and Pikes Peak and the air, oh, the air, that thin, crisp, bright air, it was love. And just love at first sight. I just totally adored it. And then, as good luck would have it, my German was so bad. I need to see this. Was so bad that I had to drop one of my 3 German courses because I just couldn't do it. But luckily, Jane Colville, who was chair of the department, of philosophy department at that time, was teaching a summer school course in aesthetics. And so I dropped the German course, took the aesthetics course, and Jane and I just hit it off. She was a wonderful teacher. I loved the way she was doing philosophy. And as the summer ended, and Jane looked at me and said, well, if you need a letter of recommendation when you're looking for jobs, please call. It was better than a letter of recommendation. The job at Colorado College opened in 1968, and Jane was chair, and oh, thank you, fates. It was love at first sight, and it's remained. There's just, what can you say? I mean, why did I fall in love with Colorado College? It wasn't the architecture of the buildings, it wasn't particularly the layout of the college. There was, if you will, every place has an ethos, just its own way of being, what it is. And there was something in the air, something in what this place is that was so vibrantly alive, so incredibly intense, without, if you will, not the intensity of the University of Chicago, which is just a sheer intellectual intensity, but an intensity about living, about engaging life fully and knowing and feeling that ideas played an important role in that full engagement with life. And it's always been here. I've always felt it. the students just presented all the time, and it's just been joyful to teach and to participate in this place. It is unique. I tell you, it is unique. For a year, I was head of the ACM GLCA, Associated Colleges of the Midwest program at the Newberry Library in Chicago, which was a rather wonderful thing to do. But part of my responsibilities were I had to travel to all the ACM colleges and all the GLCA colleges, all of these small liberal arts colleges in Ohio and Illinois and Indiana and Wisconsin and Minnesota and Iowa. And it was winter, it wasn't much fun driving there, but you could really get a sense of the places as you went to them. And Colorado College is unique. They may all look like small liberal arts colleges doing more or less the same thing. Not true. This is the place that fits me and where I want to be.
This might be a nice moment in our conversation to ask Professor Emerita Jane Covell to speak. Jay?
With me?
No.
Brenda.
Hold it closer.
No, there's a switch.
Closer? Oh, that's
There
a
is.
difference. Thank you. Well, this is a great occasion, and thank you, John, for giving us this occasion, and for Jonathan, and it's a pleasure to see you again, and to have you here, and to keep you here. Anyway, I take a certain amount of responsibility for this. In that summer, when I was teaching the aesthetics class, here came this bright, eager young man, very attractive young man. He's gotten even more handsome as he gets older, but anyway. And he always spoke up in class, and he seemed very interested in the material. If he was faking, why, that's all right too. So I was very pleased with him, and we did build up a relationship there. And he was very thoughtful and wrote excellent papers. There was more thought than many of the other students, and reflections, which were very helpful. Anyway, he very easily made an A and left campus, but he was very much in my mind, and so much to my surprise, at the American Philosophical Association meetings, that was a year and a half later, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, a year and a half later, Glenn Gray had been there, and interviewing, and he called me and he said, there's a young man here that said he was in your class. Is that true? Do you remember him? And I said, oh, by all means I do. And he says, he's applying for a job at the college. I said, bring him. So John came, and we hit it off, all of us in the department. And so John has decided to stay, thankfully, and help build a very strong department. And not just a strong academic department, but I would say a joyful department. I think John's state of mind and his, well, it's optimistic, but not false optimism, really conveyed to the department and to the students, so that it, as I say, it's a joyful department. So we're all thankful that John came. I am particularly. And so now, since he's talked about this, I don't want to take his time. So I'll turn this off, turn it back to John, and say, John, thank you, I love you.
Thank you, Jane.
So John, you arrived at the college in a faculty capacity in the fall of 1968, that very turbulent year that you talked a little bit about yesterday. And it was also shortly before the block plan began. Mm-hmm. So you actually go back before the block plan. And I'm curious what the students were like in your first few years at the college. Some of them are here.
Some of them are here, yes. You know, people often ask me how the students changed
I was going to ask that next.
over this half century. The students, of course, you remember your first students very vividly. And they were engaged, they were affirmative of me as a teacher. There was one young major who didn't like me. But aside from that, and by the end she said, you know, you're good. And that was very, so they were these bright, engaged people, just like they've always been. With 1968, it was more radical. We were very much politically radicalized. I mean, as the Vietnam War was on, Nixon got elected, and the politics and the outrage among our students and our faculty about what the nation was doing was very serious. And that got into the classroom in terms of just an intensity. We need to have philosophy speak to us and speak to the world. What does it have to say about what's going on? And those were difficult years, but really very important years. The one thing I can say about the good old semester system, before we turned to blocks, was I had a couple of students who rather liked what I was doing, and it took one course a semester for 2 or 3 years. And so I saw them almost every day of the year for 2 or 3 years, and it really made quite a difference for that to happen. It wasn't the intense love fest of a block, but it had its own joy.
Mm-hmm. So how would you say that students have changed over the years?
They've just gotten more intelligent. In a typical class today, I would put my intelligence about at the 50%. At least 50% of my students today are brighter than I am. They certainly are most of them write much better papers than I wrote when I was an undergraduate. They're just super bright, but they haven't given up a lot of the rest of their living to attain that brightness, and I really enjoy that. When I was a visiting professor at the University of Chicago about 15 years ago, the students there were also very, very bright, but they had given up so much to be these kind of intellectuals, and I couldn't really locate that wonderful, vibrant source of a living, multi-dimensional human being. And that's why, all of our students, all of these years, have had that as part of what defines them. Obviously, in this last half decade, the composition of the student body has changed dramatically. The number of international students, the number of ethnic minority students has really made the campus a much more vibrant place.
I think this might be a nice time to ask Tom Roberts, class of 2017, to say a few words.
Sure. Hi, I'm Tom Roberts. I first of all just want to congratulate John on this milestone and thank him for asking me to speak at this. I feel very honored to be partaking in this conversation. And some of you may know that I can be pretty long-winded, so I wrote down what I'm going to say. John and I had dinner a couple weeks ago, and I had the pleasure of hearing his musings about what it means to teach and why he's done it for so long. He described the pinnacle of teaching as opening a new mind to the riches of philosophy. I think that John continues to inspire young minds because he's managed to keep his own mind young for so long. You can see when he teaches that he's not relating ideas he arrived at long ago that are static in his mind, but that he's constantly re-excavating these familiar thoughts and rendering them anew. Constantly opening his own mind to this rediscovery, he inspires the opening of younger minds by his example. I remember him remarking about Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming, that he, as a teacher, needs to overcome his own thoughts, that he must continue to reimagine and rediscover the thinkers and thoughts that he teaches. If he weren't rediscovering these thinkers every time he taught them, he said, if he simply related the ideas he had about them as though they were settled and done in his mind, then philosophy would die, both for him and his students. In the spirit of a true thinker, John is, after all this time, still engaged in the practice of thinking thoughts anew. And you can see this in the classroom with him. I remember walking into his History of Modern Philosophy class as a freshman with some vague, undeveloped understanding of what philosophy might be. I remember John drawing a diagram of mountains that might be familiar to some of you all here, representing philosophers whose height reflected the difficulty of the ascent, the highest of which was reserved for Hegel, which didn't even fit on the board, went way off the top of the board. After taking an earnest swing at Descartes, who was a hill next to Hegel, and thinking little other than whatever Descartes was meditating about must have been tremendously difficult to write down, because it was tremendously painstaking to read, I was unsure if I would be standing on any philosopher peaks in those 2 months. But what I didn't realize at first was how experienced and engaged a guide I had in John. He wouldn't be the old accomplished guide who yelled advice from base camp, but the weathered mountaineer who just couldn't wait to make the ascent again. And as we thought our way up mountain after mountain and opened our minds to their views together, John taught me what philosophy is by doing philosophy right alongside me. And so I want to thank you, John, for teaching me to never stop learning philosophy.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much.
So John, I suppose this makes me ask the question, how do you think you've changed as a teacher of philosophy over these years?
Oh, dear.
You can't be doing the same thing now that you did 50 years
No,
ago.
no. When I look back, it feels like I was asleep in those first decades. Yes, I was teaching some wonderful things, some great philosophers in philosophy, but as you get older, it just feels like the world opens up and you just have more depth of experience and wisdom. I mean, nothing you can say, but it feels like it broadens. I would say the most important thing that happened to me that I talked a little bit about yesterday was, again, bad fate, good fate. I had a fairly serious psychological breakdown in the late 70s and had to get into a psychoanalytic psychotherapy. And all at once I started to find out things about myself that I never knew. I mean, horrible things, awful things. But it was like a part of me that I had not recognized or owned or brought into my own being started now to become part of me. And I started to understand much more about the difficulties of becoming a self, becoming genuinely engaged as a person with the world, and to be able to genuinely love another human being. From that moment, and for the years that passed, it's not just something you work on in yourself, but as I became more knowledgeable about who and what I was, I also became much more knowledgeable about human beings and the deep problems that we all have to face, not just the great existential problems of philosophy. What does it mean to be mortal? What ultimately is real? How is it best to live? Deeper problems with how do I become who I am? How do I come to know who I really am as a singular, particular human being that needs to engage this very difficult form of life that we all are living in today? And with that new knowledge, and particularly new knowledge in what I would call psychoanalytic self-psychology, I came to a set of ideas and understandings that I found could help my students much more than what I was teaching before. And so I think I've changed fairly radically as a teacher. I've always been, I think, vibrant and lively in the classroom, but I have more depth of care for my students. And that has made all the difference.
Well, with that in mind, is there a philosophical text that you still love to teach today as much as you loved to teach 50 years ago?
My students will love this one. For one of the most difficult texts ever in philosophy, Whitehead's Process and Reality. Yeah. But, you know, every time I go back and teach the early Platonic dialogues, the Apology and Crito and Euthyphro, and especially the Symposium and the Republic, I just, it's just, you know, like finding a former lover. It's just wonderful. And then, I mean, whenever I teach Aristotle's Ethics, there's so much wisdom in that book about human life. I just cherish every time I can teach it, which is at least once a year for the past 50 years. And Nietzsche's a gas, just a gas to teach. And every time, since Tom mentioned him, Hegel appears in modern philosophy, I just get terrified. Just fully, totally terrified. He's so, so difficult. But, oh my heavens, does he engage my mind and bring me to such complexity of thought. For those days that were with Hegel, it's very hard to sustain that depth and complexity of thought. But it's always, what an experience to go through, if not every year, at least every other year. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Thanks. I think this might be a nice time to sort of shift gears a little bit. And I'm going to ask Jane again to speak on behalf of an alumna of the college who can't be here today, but this is Nancy Hernandez from the class of 1996. Jane?
This is a very heartfelt message. And this is a very heartfelt message. And Nancy worked it over each day, I think, for the last 5 days. And I would get an email from her. This is the last version. So I think you will feel her emotional response and her feelings toward John. She says, "Hello, my name is Nancy Hernandez, class of 1996. I am sorry I cannot be there in person. My mother offered to bring a mariachi band and serve tequila. But I thought it might be more appropriate to have Dr. Cobble present on my behalf. I met Professor Riker after a disastrous first block at CC. She came from El Paso, Texas, I'll just comment. My high school counselor, who thought CC was a community college, signed me up for pre-calculus. I failed and was devastated. She'd gotten A's all through high school, as you can imagine. Like many first-generation students, I was not prepared for what I encountered at CC. When I was asked to go to Dean Victor Nelson Cisneros' office, I figure I would be on the bus back to El Paso in no time. I'd been told that I was smart, but I felt inadequate among the brilliant and beautiful CC students, the immaculate campus grounds, and the endless supply of Lucky Charms in Resto. I was relieved when Victor told me I could stay, and he rearranged my classes to include one with Professor Riker. Getting to know John set me on a path to a love affair with philosophy and towards a non-traditional Latina life. But it was not an easy journey. For several years, the task of reaffirming my confidence fell on him as my advisor. He had to explain many things. To start, he explained that CC students were not necessarily smarter, just more privileged. He demystified and destigmatized mental health for me. And he informed me about the importance of friendships. He explained academic research and graduate school, then added helpful information about movies, art, opera, myths, guess what? Ballroom dancing, and dreams. He offered me much needed house and pet sitting jobs. He provided a safety net when life became too much to handle. And in a key moment, he offered condolences on the untimely death of Tejano music star Selena, if you remember. That was when I knew he'd crossed over to the Latino side. When I finally made it to graduation, he raced up from his chair to hug me. I knew I could not have survived college without his kindness and generosity. When we first began speaking, he observed that as a white male, he could not understand my life as a first-generation student and as the daughter of Mexican immigrants. He didn't pretend to know my culture, but he listened and tried to understand. He helped me feel like I belonged in my own country. Instead, he applied philosophy to get to know me and see my worldview. He reminded me that I was an equal among an elite student body and that I had my own wealth of wisdom. He helped me understand academia and how to operate in a white world. He showed me how the people who seemed so at ease and well-adjusted were in many cases having similar troubles to mine. He helped me see the strengths I brought to campus, and he showed me how to apply what I was learning in class. He believed in me more than I believed in myself. I needed his help to counter my doubts and insecurities. I needed his acceptance of my messy and painful growth process, which included a lot of anger about racism and oppression. I think John and I both know that. I needed that process to learn to temper my emotions. It has made me a better social justice advocate and a stronger one. I recognize how hard it must have been to be my advisor back then. I was so angry and so raw. But John has always been so patient and supportive and kind. For many years, I felt that I had given him little in return. When he informed me about the books he authored, which were inspired by some of our discussions, and of his subsequent mentoring of many groups of first-generation students, I knew that I had given him as much a gift as he had given me. I hope that John is proud of my use of philosophy in my life. I was scared to declare it as my major, but he explained the business of majors and vocations. And since I trusted him, I embraced my passion. When students ask me if they should learn philosophy, I say, philosophy is suitable for the outliers, for those of us whose questioning and thinking is dangerous and deviant. Just remember, once you take the blue pill, you can never go back. Philosophy has led me to a remarkable and viable vocation. To philosophers, the owl represents wisdom. But to my culture, and to many native cultures, it means death. It makes sense. Parts of me had to die in order for other parts of me to grow. I had to learn to be comfortable with uncertainty and with not having answers. I had to learn to live alone. But I am grounded by understanding that we become human. It's a process of becoming human, and by believing that in dehumanizing others, we dehumanize ourselves. I learned this from John Riker, who saw me struggle with issues that he could not understand, and yet he trusted that I would find my peace with them. Sometimes I catch myself with my chin in my hand, nodding and listening intently to a young group of students. I wait before I respond. I try to let them make their own peace with their life journey. And sometimes people tell me, when you speak the truth. Do it more often. That's when I know that I am using a gift John Riker shared with me, and I can think of no better way to honor him. Congratulations to my mentor and friend, John Riker. Okay, now I'll tell you about what happened to this young lady, insecure as she was. She went on and got a PhD in higher education with a lot of help and encouragement, and she worked very hard. She worked in numerous nonprofits, and now she has the title of Equity Specialist Coordinator at the Western Educational Equity Assistance Center. Okay. I asked her for 3 sentences about her work, and she said, I provide consulting and training to help educational systems address issues of equity. And she drives all over the state and to other parts of the Western area, and in fact is Washington, D.C. now in advanced seminars on issues of discrimination and equity and how you talk to groups that have been censored by the government. And she says, I am a college coach and mentor for first-generation and low-income students and those seeking careers in the nonprofit sector. And she has a whole clan of people that follow her, I assure you. And I am a social justice advocate and volunteer. So that's her story. Thank you, John.
So Nancy's not here, but I need to convey to Nancy through Jane. I do not think any other student taught me as much as Nancy Hernandez. What she wrote is true. I said, I don't understand you or where you're from. Please teach me. And she taught me. She spent hours teaching me about what it meant to be a first-generation Latina student coming to Colorado from parents who did not speak English and was so totally out of her her world to come here, and how to accommodate to this world, and how she didn't really want to fully accommodate to this world. That she found there's some things about this world that disgusted her. And we negotiated the world she came from and this world, and she taught me to see this world, or my usual world, in very different ways, and to understand her Latino world in a very different way. It was quite an educational experience.
It's true. Yeah, I'd actually like to push you just a little bit more on that, because
Okay.
I would love to hear a little bit more about how your interest in equity and inclusion and diversity issues has helped shape your ongoing sense of our discipline of philosophy, which is sort of famously problematic in this regard.
Oh, that's a hard question.
I know. Sorry.
I mean, the simple answer is to encourage as many women and ethnic students to think about majoring in philosophy and going on in philosophy, it's always with some ambivalence, since it's not an easy world. And many of the women, fine undergraduates who go into philosophy often, for PhDs, often drop out. So it's a hard one, how to make philosophy a more robust field. I would say that certainly one of the things that is true for me is that we need to address these issues. I know that many of us in the department do, but to not have our philosophy courses be abstract, but to have them deal with these human problems at a theoretical and a personal level in the classroom, and to talk about those problems. I have to say, along with this, that the other great learning experience I had was when I initiated bridge groups at Colorado College. And it was, my first group of 11, they called themselves the CC 11. They, there they were, Hispanic, African American, and me. And it was really one of the first times in my life where I felt like I really was the outsider. I was the different person. And they taught me more about this college, more about my life, more about human living than I think anyone else. Those were great, great groups. That, as I said, I had to come out of my element. I had to engage people with different, they didn't like going to the mountains. What? Doesn't everyone love to go to the mountains? Come on, we're city folk. Where's the city stuff around here? And just different music, different kinds of dancing. Oh my, they really helped me grow up. I love them.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I think this might be a nice time for me to invite. Oh,
she's here. Natalie's here.
Natalie Lewis, class of 2003. Awesome.
Hi. Sorry for Denver traffic coming down to Colorado Springs. I was so grateful when Professor Riker reached out to me to ask me to speak. I am of the first CC11 cohort, and when I get invitations for CC homecoming, I kind of pause, like, don't need to do that. I lived that experience one time, because that dynamic of diversity, inclusion, and equity is real, and it created a lasting memory, both bittersweet for CC. And the experience of being with Professor Riker 2 weeks before school started, coming from Denver, considering myself a leader, and being excited about being in being able to attend Colorado College, I paused. Like at first when I got the letter, like, oh, you get to come, and I was so excited. And then we showed up, and I started to notice that there was something in common, that all of us shared an experience of being a person of color. And I instantly looked like, wait a minute now, Professor Riker, why are we all in this program? Because that wasn't messaged in the letter that we received. And I could tell that it caught him off guard, and he paused for a second, and he said, you're right, Natalie, this is a program for students of color, and it's CC's attempt to be able to ensure that students of color have a positive and lasting experience here at CC. And those relationships with this first CC11, we came 11 days before, and there were actually 11 of us. The relationships that I created with those CC11 members, I still have, and they're some of my best friends today. And we met once a week, and our relationship, it grew so deeply in that moment. I had no idea that when school started, how much more I'd even need them during that time. And not only would I need those students, but I didn't know I was going to need, like, who is Professor Riker? It's like this older white man, and like, what? He's talking about philosophy, he's taking us to his home near the Garden of the Gods. What are we going to talk about when school gets started? And when each week we met with him every Wednesday at lunch for my whole freshman year. And I came with tears pouring down my face about the experiences that I had in class and about the different learnings, and where I had to advocate and continually learn and know that I was smart enough to be here, that I was strong enough to be here. And my meetings with Professor Riker assured me of that, absolutely, in every session. So even though that my spirit, I didn't really understand this concept of vital energy, and Professor Riker introduced that to me, that even though my vital energy was low in moments when before the lunch started, by the end my spirit was back, and he'd given me a belief in myself that I could do it. And by the end of my freshman year at CC, Professor Riker, we were coming to our close and we were having like one of our final lunches, and he says, "Natalie, I want to talk to you about something." I'm like, "Oh, okay, what's it gonna be?" And he said, "Natalie, I really think that you should consider a PhD and going into the professoriate." And I was like, I don't know. I'm going to law school and I'm going to be a politician and I'm going to be in the government. And I was very adamant that that was what my life calling was. And so at that time, I kind of paused. But by the time I finished my experience at CC, and I was coming to the end of my senior year, and I knew that I was going to go to graduate school for my master's, I knew that I wanted to pursue a PhD. And here I am 15 years later, and I'm coming to the close of my doctoral experience. And I know that I would not have even considered that as a possibility if Professor Riker hadn't planted those seeds. And words truly have power, and I believe that words have the ability to manifest, and there's so many positive things. That's still the CC11 when we meet now as adults 15 plus years later, that we still speak of those seeds and those things that you planted, and you have done amazing things. And I hear, as you read the letter from Nancy, it resonated so deeply to me because that was my experience. And you called and activated the leader that I already knew that I was, and you affirmed that here on this small private liberal arts campus, and I am forever grateful, and I just want to say thank you.
Natalie taught me more than anyone else besides Nancy. She was a very forceful student, and she allowed me to really understand and see the problems that students of color were having at Colorado College, and we really tried to work them through as best we could together. It was a great experience. Thank you, Natalie. Probably should call on Corey.
Yes, I was just my thought. We have one more voice to hear, and that's Corey Barron, class of 2017. Corey.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, John. As Jonathan said, my name is Corey Barron. I graduated in 2017, and as is clear from the amount of support here today, I obviously don't need to explain how incredible John's legacy is as a professor, as a mentor, and as an advisor, but I'll quickly take the time to call out the elements of his teaching that I have found most admirable. For context, John was an essential part of my time at CC from the beginning. I chose to major in philosophy because I heard him speak on a panel while I was still in my FYE freshman year, and I knew immediately that I wanted to learn from him, and I feel a little bit of that today as I'm sitting here and he began to speak, just that joy of getting to be in the room while he's speaking and sharing. And so I took his course on ethics, third block of my freshman year, so right out of my FYE, and never looked back, and feel so lucky to be one of the obviously many students he has impacted in his long and continuing career. Studying with John caused me to seriously question the role of a professor, and I mean that in the best way. The question raised by his teaching is, are professors meant to convey knowledge, or is their job to inspire the love of knowledge and its pursuit? Excuse me. While John does both, it is his constant focus on the latter that makes him so special in the classroom. I truly believe that the best preparation for a constantly evolving world is an earnest enthusiasm for continued learning, and John taught me to challenge my own stagnation, constantly let go of anything that has run its course, and always be willing to move courageously into the unknown. The most important ingredient for inspiring this enthusiasm for learning is love. And I've always admired John's bravery in unabashedly infusing his daily work with love and passion. Philosophy, like many academic disciplines, is often at risk of becoming dry and divorced from meaning, which is what it was designed to provide in the first place. Yet John never wavers from his essential goal of igniting vitality, or a love of life itself. A love of life itself in each of his students, of inspiring each of us to feel alive, to be alive, to pursue aliveness, and to do so through love. And isn't that ultimately what our world needs more of? While a worthy aim of the liberal arts college is certainly to develop minds that can think, in order for us to have a well-functioning society that can adapt to practical challenges, isn't it at least as important for our educational institutions to develop people who can love, deeply, openly, and unapologetically, in order for us to build a world of fulfillment and compassion? Because John isn't afraid to bring love into the classroom, he's able to provide the spark for the love of learning that can guide someone through a lifetime of continuous expansion. John, it's incredible to be here today to reflect on how many lives you must have sparked over the past 50 years. I'm honored to be included in this celebration, and thank you for everything.
Well, thank you, Corey.
I have one last question I want to ask John before I recognize one final speaker. And that is, as you start your second half-century of teaching, is there a course that you've been dying to teach and that you've never had a chance to teach?
Oh.
And if so, as there must be, what would it be?
Wow. Probably, that's a hard one, philosophy of religion. That is to say, especially new thinking about what might the presence of the sacred or divine presence in this world, how to go about thinking about it and conceiving it. I think the old ways, Nietzsche was right, the old ways of thinking about divine presence are dead. Right? Imagining that divine presence to be a kind of person watching out for things. That conceptualization is not holding our hearts, at least the hearts and minds of some of our deep thinking students. And I would like to engage them with trying to rethink or think anew whether there is divine presence and how it might be best to think about it. So,
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful.
yeah, the future.
I wonder if this might be a moment when you and or Marcia would like to say a little bit more about the extraordinary gift that the two of you have made that has been announced today.
Can I just say one little thing?
You can say
Two things. I need to say two things, and then Marcy and I can talk. Two amazing things about my career at Colorado College. One, I've missed class only 3 days because of illness. I think that's pretty impressive. It's not to say I didn't drag my butt into class sometimes, but I showed up. Because under the block plan, you can't not show up. The second thing, and this is for my president and any other administrators who might be here, I didn't publish anything of significance, or anything really, for 25 years. I threw myself into teaching, learning how to teach, creating new courses, exploring new materials. I didn't have enough wisdom or knowledge, or I hadn't hit those ideas that were so important to me that I needed to write about them. It's only in the last quarter century that all at once the ideas started to gel and come to me, and lo and behold, in the last quarter century, nothing the first quarter century, 4 books, hundreds of papers and addresses going around the world talking the conferences. And that was able to happen because Colorado College was patient with me. Extremely patient. They didn't even, they weren't saying things like, you don't get tenure unless you've published X, Y, and Z. I never got a note saying, why aren't you publishing? I never got angry words or dismissive looks for not being some kind of great scholar. Colorado College waited and was patient and let me blossom in my own good time. What college could do that? I am so, so grateful for this magnificent place. It's been my home.
Marcia?
Yes. My name is Marcia Dobson, and I don't think like John. But I wanted to, if it's room for just a few funny things, I probably know more about John than anybody else in this room. When I first came to Colorado College, I had any number of job offers because that was the time when women got job offers, and I was a Harvard graduate, and so the field was open for me. But I heard about this course that my chair, Owen Kramer, had been teaching with John Riker, whom I didn't know at all, called Greek History and Philosophy. And I thought to myself, if there's one thing I would like more than anything else, it would be to teach a 2-block course in Greek history and philosophy. And so I told Owen, Professor Kramer, that I would come if I could teach Greek history and philosophy. And he said, all right, I'll yield my position so you can come. And so I came and I met this man, John Riker, who was supposed to be my joint teacher. I was supposed to be his joint teacher. I was definitely an ingenue. And we taught that course together for 24 years. I know what John is like as a teacher, not as a student, but as both his student and his teacher. I am a classicist. I love books. I cherish books. Books are sacred to me. I open them up. I look at my ancient Greek. I read carefully and in a scholarly way. When I walked in and taught with John Riker, he threw his Plato on the floor and he put his foot on it. And I was absolutely shocked. There were numerous times that I was shocked at his teaching. We teach in a very, very different way. He was highly conceptual. I am absolutely mythic, I think in a constellated, mythical way. When he did put that book under his foot, he then turned to the class and he started to teach. And I could not believe what came out of his mouth. He didn't need the book. He was with the students. And one of the most delightful things that I ever heard him do, and he did it over and over again when we read Plato together, he would put the book down and he would look at one of his students and he'd say, now, what do you think happiness is? Well, and then he would continue with his student in dialogue, and he turned into Socrates. And it was absolutely stunning to see him do that. I taught with him for 4 years, I think, and then we got into Aristotle's Ethics. And this must have been the first year, but anyway, I was reading Aristotle's Ethics for the first time. And I was sitting there and I was looking at it and I thought, oh my gosh, there's such a thing as virtue. There's such a thing as moderation. There's such a thing as a mean between the extremes. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever read in my life. And then I came in and John taught it. And for any of you who were here yesterday, it was an erotic eruption. I fell completely in love with John at that moment because he taught me ethics. Now imagine that for Eros. Anyway, we've been married now for 37 years. I've known John for 40 years. I met him on Valentine's Day many, many years ago. And it has been the happiest, most wonderful period of my entire life. We have taught each other so much. So thank you, my dear.
Oh, thank you, my dear. So, Jonathan asked me, and I'll just say a few words because there's some nice goodies out there that we all want to get to. Marcy and I found a way, with the help of Mimi Kavanaugh. Is Mimi here? Yes. To arrange our retirement funds in such a way that we were able to endow a professorship in both of our names. How nice is that? In both of our names, a professorship for psychoanalysis, creativity, and self. Because we believe so deeply in the value. Psychoanalysis means discipline in thinking which wants to delve to the very depths of human experience and understand it. Self is because for young people at college, we want them to be on a path to trying to find who they are such that they can live authentically for the rest of their lives. And creativity, because we think that the most alive part of human life is the ability to create, especially to learn how to create your own life without having to follow just the codes and be repetitions of the various kinds of models that are out there, to have the courage to be creative in one's own life and one's own choices. And we believe so deeply in those values that we wanted to create a professorship where they would be sustained in perpetuity. And so I thank Marcia. Thank you.
Well, on that note, on behalf of all of us who've joined us today and all who are present in spirit, if not here, I want to thank you all for coming. And there are refreshments, a nice reception just outside the door of the theater. And thank you, John. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.